Hey, everybody. Once again, I am Derrick Day, and I'm without my normal partner in crime, Aaron Tomlinson, tonight. Aaron's taking the day off and enjoying some time off, and we miss him, but we're going to keep on going. And I'm doing this a little bit early so it doesn't get confused with what we normally do, whether we call it phreology, whether we call it growing in real time. I want to make sure that this is something distinct, that is something different, and that it doesn't interfere with what we've been doing for the last 6 years. And it's amazing. We've been doing this for 6 years, Aaron and I. It'll be in July. It'll be actually 6 years that we've been doing some form of phreology or growing in real time or the Gnostic agnostics, whatever it is that we've been doing. But anyway, I want to give a moment to let everybody come in because this is something that if you haven't considered, you probably want to give it a little bit of thought because the interesting thing, and when the last time I did a solo gig like this, I was talking about Iran and how we got to where we are, considering the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and his shenanigans abroad. And and I talked about the history of Iran and how we basically slipped, tripped, and stumbled into this, but we didn't really because this is actually something that's been brewing for some time, and and now we have the potential for something even worse. And that's what I want to get into tonight because let me tell you something. The reason why Adolf Hitler and the Axis powers did not prevail in World War II was because Germany chose to fight a war on multiple fronts without sufficient alliances. Because essentially, Hitler had Italy and Mussolini, Spain and Franco, and Japan and Hirohito. So you had basically Germany trying to fight the British and the French while through Operation Barbarossa prosecuting a war on the Eastern Front against Soviet Russia. And if you know anything about the historical context of this, you know that Hitler got his ass handed to him in Eastern Europe, and he got his ass handed to him in Russia. He wasn't prepared for the weather. He wasn't prepared for the terrain. In his basically, he had paid no attention to Sun Tzu, or maybe he had no awareness of Sun Tzu. I don't know, but he didn't. Clearly, he didn't get that memo. He didn't get Sun Tzu's memo, and he went into Russia, and that turned out to be his undoing, or as we say concerning Napoleon Bonaparte, that was his Waterloo. So, um, and that is the lead in to what I want to talk about tonight. And that is this: that is the United States really prepared to to fight a war on two fronts? And I'm going to say that the short answer is no. And I'm also going to say that the long answer also is no. For a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't have the means. Our current active duty military is about 4 million strong, which pales in comparison to, say, China's military, which is about 100 million strong. The math just ain't math. And not only that, but the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is probably close to our military numerically. Definitely not in terms of sophistication, but in numbers. And when it comes to matters of war, numbers are critical. Numbers are essential. And we need to understand that if the numbers don't number, bad things happen. But I want to get to this. I want to get to this. And you know, first of all, the duration that we are in Iran has a lot to do with what happens in China. Now, let me explain a couple of things. First of all, we have the whole issue with the Strait of Hormuz and the control of the logistical flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf, and the Iranians they're making that difficult. Now, can they sustain it? Probably not. Probably not. Eventually, the United States will likely prevail in the Strait of Hormuz, even if we don't have alliances. Which, by the way, people say, well, Derrick, the Germans didn't do too well during World War II because they had a lack of alliances, but the United States had a broad array of alliances, including the Soviet Union. And those alliances were what made it possible for us to fight war in Europe and fight war in Southeast Asia at the same time. But there were a couple of things. Number one, we had the means, and number two, we had alliances, and number three, we had the will. And this is where it breaks down, because right now we don't have the strength to fight a war on two fronts. We, through the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, have pretty much destroyed all of our alliances in the world. And so we don't have the alliances, and finally, we don't have the will. People in the United States right now are war weary, war fatigued. They're tired of war. And the more we try to step this up and to prosecute this, the more it's going to fail. It's just going to fail. And what happens is, to take a page out of Vietnam and the United States, or Afghanistan and the Soviet Union, that when you don't have popular support for a military endeavor, it generally falls apart at home. And so here's the thing. One is that Iran is making oil movement through the Straits of Hormuz difficult. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to raise the price of crude oil. It's going to raise the price of energy, not just in the West, but also in the East, because China is very dependent on Mideast oil. And I would say particularly Iranian oil, but we'll get to that in a minute. So here's what happens. You choke off the Straits of Hormuz, you choke off the flow of oil to necessary trading partners, the price of oil goes way up. And you have China sitting over in Beijing watching what's going on. And imagine, if you will, and this is the thrust of my argument here tonight, is that China wants to unify China. They've already done this through Hong Kong and Macau. They've already reunited those once European-held territories and woven them back into the overall Chinese fabric. But Taiwan still stands out, and it stands out like a very, very sore thumb, because the Chinese Revolution, in which Mao Zedong overcame Chiang Kai-shek, lives on in Taiwan. And this is a sore spot for China, because they largely consider the revolution to be a massive success. And because they consider it a success, Taiwan not being part of China is kind of a stick in the eye. It's a splinter in the eye of China. So why doesn't China simply take Taiwan militarily? And that's because the United States has sort of it has a funky foreign policy with China in which we have a one China diplomatic stance that's not aligned with China's. In other words, we don't recognize Taiwan as an independent nation because we are we strive to be trading partners and global partners with Beijing, but but we still honor the freedom ostensibly that Taiwan has. And also Taiwan is strategic in their production of semiconductors that are largely used in AI. More on that in a minute. So we serve as a detente between mainland China and the Formosan government, which that's Taiwan. Now, eventually, China wants to eliminate that gap. They want Taiwan to be part of the overall Chinese fabric. And the one thing that stands in the way of that is the United States. Now, why is that important right now? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's because a protracted war in Iran could serve as a catalyst for Chinese aggression in Taiwan. Why? Because if they understand that the United States is mired in, or they're in a quagmire, let's be more specific, in Iran, they don't have the ability to fight a second front between China and Taiwan. And and I think China has a better understanding of the will of the American people because again, we're already as a nation war weary. We're tired from Iraq, we're tired from Afghanistan, we're tired from Vietnam. We are tired of the little campaigns that we've had here in the Americas, in Nicaragua, uh, Cuba, Grenada. We're war weary. Americans are tired of war. And if the Chinese understand that clearly, and also understand that we don't have the means, so that means we don't have the means, we don't have the will, and we certainly don't have the alliances to fight war on two fronts. Now, this is critically important because, again, if we are so stuck in Iran that we can't do anything in the rest of the world, then that opens some doors for China to possibly move in on Taiwan. Now, granted, China is very dependent on Mideast oil, particularly Iranian oil. However, if the Chinese supply from the Middle East is choked out, China can go to Russia. And also, China could go to Vietnam. Because one of the things that people don't realize is that Vietnam was largely what it was because they understood the geological aspects of South China Sea oil. Don't take my word for it, look it up. So imagine if the United States gets into a protracted war in Iran. And now I'm going to speak prophetically here. And it's this, that if you run this, like, say, a year, 365 days from day one, I would say somewhere around close to day 365, the Chinese will be figuring out that this is going to go on for a minute. And if it's going to go on for a minute, you can expect saber rattling from China. You can expect that there will be more activity in China. You can expect that China will act upon its one China diplomatic stance. Now, here's the thing, like, we have taken the slippery slope approach with Taiwan. And basically, we don't maintain diplomatic relations with Taiwan because we switched from Taipei to Beijing in 1979. But it's also preserve relations through what they call the Taiwan Relations Act. And it continues to sell arms and has other unofficial cooperation. And as I mentioned, Taiwan is a major supplier of semiconductors and microchips that are involved in the AI industry. And let me tell you this, because should China make a move on Taiwan and they make a successful move, then that means now we're beholden to the Chinese for our AI semiconductors, and we are kind of at their mercy. And understand this, we are already at China's mercy for a lot of things. There's a lot of manufactured stuff that only originates in China. For example, there was a book that I had read by Ted Koppel some years back, and I can't remember the name of the book, but in that book, Ted Koppel was basically saying that if China has control over the semiconductor industry, and not just semiconductors, but, like, for example, generators. Let's talk about generators. I was having a senior moment or a brain fart. Y'all excuse me, but generators, power generators. Power generators are largely not made in the United States anymore, and there are only a handful that are made in the EU. Most of them are made in China, and you have to look at this from an Internet of Things perspective, because these things are all connected devices, and that means that we're able to trigger a generator, say, from a mobile device. And this is important if you're a hospital administrator or you're part of a hospital administrative staff, and there's a glitch in the power grid and you need generative power. And if you can't do that, then that means people die. And the whole healthcare system, which is already on precarious footing here in the U.S., it would be trouble. So we don't make generators. China does. These are all connected through the Internet of Things. They're all connected devices. Why couldn't China backdoor power generators? I mean, that's something. It's it kind of rides the fine line between a tactical and a strategic resource, but because it does Venn diagram into strategic from tactical. And once that happens, you take out a vital strategic link. And you have to understand also that not only private hospitals, but also VA and military hospitals also depend on these same generative power units. And if China is able to backdoor those, we have a problem. We have a problem. So again, Beijing's position is that there's only one China and that Taiwan is part of it. But the U.S.'s position is more ambiguous. It's like Washington recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China, but it doesn't adopt Beijing's sovereignty over Taiwan. It doesn't just accept that. And so the U.S. policy still includes the Taiwan Relations Act, and there are assurances that we've given the Taiwan government that we will simply not roll over and allow China to have its way with Taiwan. And again, we're talking about modern economies here. We're talking about interconnected, interdependent economies. Not only is it just oil, but it's manufacturing, it's process mining of precious and semi-precious metals, it's agriculture. There are so many things that are interconnected that if there is a hiccup between the United States and China, that this is going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire world, where you're going to have economic turmoil, you're going to have diplomatic turmoil, and you're going to have military turmoil. And don't get this twisted, because there are people that are also playing in the periphery of this, because we know that Russia is providing Iran with targeting on U.S. ships and positions. We already know that Russia is in on this conflict, siding with Iran. Also, that you have North Korea, and North Korea, they have nuclear weapons, and China is their benefactor. And in fact, North Korea simply does not exist without China. So they would have a vested interest in any terror or any military action against the United States or any of its allies, should it come down to this. And then also, you have to include both India and Pakistan, who both have nuclear weapons and the means of delivering those payloads ballistically. This is very, very complicated. Now, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, because I want everybody who's listening to understand why this is important, and why. And let me say this: I have a call to action, and I'm going to embed this like right here in the middle of things. And the call of action, and listen, like and subscribe to content if it resonates with you in any way. I'd really appreciate it. It helps to tweak the algorithm, but. The thing is that the call to action is not about me, not about punching up the algorithm for me. The call to action is that we, the people, what we find in the preamble to the Constitution, we, the people, that is you and I, we have the ability and the responsibility to put pressure on our elected officials to not let things happen that will deliberately cause harm to the United States. And let me say this, that Iran, and I've heard so many different things about this. They say, well, Iran is killing their people. They're torturing dissidents, and they don't allow women to fully participate in their government. And we have other enemies that are just as brutal as Iran. We don't do anything about those. And that's because the United States has developed a reputation of not standing up to the like power. It likes to stand over inferior power. In other words, like a bully. And I'll tell you a story. This is my childhood, and your mileage may vary. But my little brother Brian, and he may be watching this, or he might not. But I was not the toughest kid. I didn't really develop anything like toughness until high school. But back when we were like in junior high, and kids didn't mind starting a fight with me, because I wouldn't. I wasn't really good at finishing fights back then. But my brother Brian, he was. And Brian understood the art of dirty fighting, which meant that if you took him on, you were running the risk of a hospital visit. because he would use whatever was at his disposal. And because we grew up in the inner city, we had all kinds of things like rocks and gravel and broken glass. He didn't mind using any of it to make the point. What I'm getting at is that Brian was smaller than me, not as big as I was, not as strong as I was. Brian understood some things. Brian understood how to stand up to the bully, and he knew how to make the bully back down. And one of the things about the United States is we have gotten really prolific in bullying. We've gotten really good at it. We bullied Iraq, we bullied Afghanistan, we bullied Syria, we bullied Egypt, we bullied Sudan, we bully many other countries. And let me say this too, that we have a bully. The United States does, and that bully is Israel. I know y'all don't like to hear about that because, especially if you're in the Judeo-Christian camp, you might say, well, talking about Israel is anti-Semitic. Listen, I have many wonderful Jewish friends, and I've been to Israel 6 times, so I have some understanding of that. And I don't have anything against Israel, their right to exist, or a homeland for the Jews. But when you talk about having that at the expense of the Palestinians, at the expense of the Lebanese, at the expense of people in Gaza, this is really gone off the rails. And frankly, I don't know what it is that Israel has on the United States, but basically this whole Iran thing, and I'm gonna say this, and y'all can like it or dislike it, love it or lump it, I don't give a fuck. But it's this, that Israel has put pressure on the United States to attack Iran. And that's another subject for another time, because that we're not talking about Israel in this. I'm only speaking here in the context of the call to action. In other words, let's put pressure on our elected officials to simply say that we are not going to be Israel's bitch in this. Okay? That's the point that I'm getting at. That's the point that I'm getting at. But one of the things about this whole oil thing and the Straits of Hormuz and China being able to get oil or not, this is a big issue for them. But I think one thing is that I think this China has probably done a far better job with its strategic reserves than we have. That's number one. So I think that they have the means. Two, that if you frame the Iran US Israel conflict in the eyes of the Chinese, and you start looking at this as the manifestation of the one China that Beijing has in mind, now you have the Chinese will in addition to the Chinese means. And again, we're going to go back to alliances, because right now India's kind of leaning Israeli, but that could change. Pakistan is very pro Gaza and very pro Palestine. And also don't forget the wild card of North Korea. Because North Korea, folks, is a country with nothing to lose. They have absolutely nothing to lose. So if they were to get involved in this, they could do it without any hesitation or any ramification, because China keeps them isolated and keeps them protected. Now, we talked about this the supply chain and why. And I want you guys to think about this, because if China decides to take a stance toward the annexation of Taiwan, that really throws the whole global supply chain and the global money market into a tizzy. Why? Because suddenly China is going to be hoarding its resources to make sure that it can uh, prosecute this conflict in Taiwan, and also they're going to marshal their supply chain. And you got to remember that China, even though that there is some capitalism, that there is some democratic movement of capital, that China remains communist. And that means that at the drop of a dime, it can turn its supply chain inward. What does that mean? Things that we need, manufactured goods that come from China, are no longer available. And you could tariff China till they're blue in the face, but you have to understand is that that China is still 1.2 billion people strong. They are the world's largest economy, and other countries not seeing things from the U.S. standpoint, talking about you, India, could just simply say, you know something, we're going to sit this conflict out, and because we need to make sure that we keep our trading status with China active for the sake of the Indian people. So that means if India decides to choose India over their alliance with the United States, it then becomes a problem for the United States. And understand this, that I would say close to half of United States information technology and data science lives in India. So if India chooses to sit this out and they decide that they're going to limit their relations with the United States, then again we have another global problem. Are y'all with me so far? I haven't checked the chat in a minute because I'm like I've got my notes going on here, and it's funny, man. It's nobody is saying anything. That's amazing. But you'll watch it later. You'll watch it later, and hopefully when you watch it later, you'll glean what I'm saying, what the points that I'm trying to make here, and we really need to understand this. This is something that frustrates me as someone who is a student of history and a student of military science and a student of global economics, is that I think that people simply don't pay attention to this. We've developed this myopia that we only see up to the point of our own borders, and this is really a very dangerous position to take because one of the things that when FDR became president back in the 30s, that he ran on being an isolationist and that we would not let Europe's political affairs bleed into American life. And so I think that right now we have achieved a pseudo isolationism. In other words, we don't want to be bothered with China's issues. We don't want to be bothered with issues in the Persian Gulf. We don't want to be bothered with Israel or Sudan. We don't want to be bothered with these things on the surface. But the thing is, these things happen. And because they do happen and we don't pay attention to them, this is an issue. It is an issue. And we need to basically we need to understand this. We need to have a better understanding of what's going on. And people say those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But I'm going to take that a step further, because not only are we doomed to repeat the history that we fail to recognize, but people who know history are doomed to watch these things unfold because no one else is paying attention. And that's why discussions like these are important. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that the whole conflict with Iran is really just a big dick contest. I mean, it is a pissing contest of epic proportions. And this is not the thing that we should be fighting over. Listen, war should be reserved for macro moral issues. For example, the Revolutionary War, which gave birth to the United States, was a there was a macro overarching moral imperative to this, in that the colonists were being taxed without being represented, and that the British were being very heavy-handed in their management of the colonies. So there was a moral imperative, and then when we get to the Civil War, there was the moral imperative of slavery. And then we get to World War One, and it was the moral imperative of a German takeover of Europe. And we get to World War Two, and there was a moral imperative regarding the murder of Jews in Germany, and also Germany's heavy-handed approach toward forcing or trying to force the British to surrender. There was, and then we get to Vietnam, and while I will debate the moral clarity or the moral compass of the Vietnam War, but ostensibly it was to stall the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. You get what I'm saying, is that if you look at all of this, if you look at all this in a big picture sense, that war is something that's left to a larger moral imperative. And right now, we simply don't have that. Because again, I've heard people say, well, the reason why we're there is because we're fighting for women's rights, and we're fighting for the rights of the citizens, we're fighting for the dissidents and all. But man, listen, you have that kind of shit going on all over the world. I mean, for example, if we look at, like, say, North Korea. See, we don't want to mess with North Korea because we know that China has their back and that they have nuclear weapons. And I'm gonna say something else too about the nuclear weapons, because I think that there's a good chance that Iran already has a nuclear weapon or two, and if not a clean thermonuclear device, that they probably have something like a dirty bomb that could spread nuclear fallout over a fairly concentrated area. And if you unload something like that in a highly populated area, like, say, New York City or Washington, D.C., Chicago, L.A., Dallas, the ramifications of that would be epic. And I think that, you know, Iran, they're already there. But let me keep going here, because I want to. I don't want to um, take this beyond where I need to. I want to really drive these points home, and I'm going to repeat the call to action again. Every American that is concerned about higher fuel prices, which will lead to higher transportation costs, which will lead to higher food prices, higher clothing prices. Um, we have an obligation to at least say to our elected officials that this is not a war of the people's choosing. Again, it's not a war of the people's choosing. You see, like when we declared war on Japan, America was outraged over Pearl Harbor. And when we went into Iraq the second time, we were outraged over 9/11. So there was a public outcry speaking to our elected officials, essentially saying, handle this shit, guys. Handle it. But Now we have to ask the question, or a couple of questions. One is, why are we in Iran? Two, if we're kowtowing to the interests of Israel, why are we doing that? And three, is this conflict worth sacrificing our relations with other nations, particularly with China, our biggest trading partner? We have to ask ourselves these three questions, and they're very critical, very difficult questions. And the one I want to deal with right now is, if Israel is the tail wagging the dog in this conflict, what does Israel have on the United States that would force them to cooperate? Because I don't think that the United States really has a dog in the hunt or a dog in the fight regarding Iran. Now, Israel is dedicated to the destruction of Iran. They even said that once they killed Iran's supreme leader, that when his successor steps up, they said he will be a target as well. And Iran has dedicated itself to the eradication of the state of Israel. Now, let me just say this. I believe in Israel's right to exist. I don't believe in their right to exist at the expense of others. And I've said this before, and I think that part of what drives this is a whole religious thing, that somehow Judeo-Christian operatives in the United States think that that our engagement with Iran is somehow going to spur the return of Jesus Christ, where he's going to come and establish. Y'all listen. Y'all listen. There is not a single shred of evidence supporting that claim. Now, you can go to the book of Revelation, you can do that all you want, but when you go to the book of Revelation, you have to also consider the preterist view of that everything in the book of Revelation happened by 70 CE. Now, it's one thing you have to consider. The other thing that you have to consider is the book is not prophetic, but it's a commentary. And if it were a commentary of what was happening in Rome at the time, then it has no bearing on what's happening now. And the book of Revelation falls flat as a prophetic device, and you're sticking your neck on the chopping block for absolutely no reason. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that those of you who believe that somehow this conflict is helping to usher in Armageddon, not only are you going to be disappointed, but you're going to be broke, grieving over the lost lives. Your whole paradigm is going to be messed up. Because if you think about this biblical prophecy that people have been predicting the end times and the return of Jesus for centuries, and it hasn't happened. And boys and girls, I hate to break you from this fairy tale, but it's not going to happen. It's simply not going to happen. There is no Armageddon. There is no return of Jesus. That's all a very nice fairy tale. But now we have to deal with some realistic stuff, and the realism of this is that the global supply chain is being disrupted, that our diplomatic ties are being disrupted. Everything that we know to be true, everything we know to be good, everything that we know to be that works is going away. And I have a rowdy dog. So that all that being said, I think that we have a moral imperative to reach out to our elected officials, to reach out to those who are control the purse strings, to those who control foreign policy and things like that. That we need to call them on the carpet and say, "Listen, guys, gals, this is something that we need to fix. This is bad news." And as long as we let this happen, and again, the biggest thing is, folks, our current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is a bully. And as long as you let the bully have his way, he's going to keep bullying. And here's the problem: when you're a bully, if you get hit in the mouth because of your bullying, that's one thing. When your brothers and sisters get hit in the mouth because of your bullying, that's another thing altogether. And so that's why this needs to stop. That's why this needs to stop. And you need to have, number one, a historical perspective of what's going on in the Persian Gulf right now. You need to have a geopolitical perspective of what's going on in the Persian Gulf right now. And you need to have an economic perspective. And all of these things tied together will shape how things are going to play out. And if you're okay with this, good on you. I got nothing else. I'm just a voice crying out in the wilderness. I'm someone that understands what's going on and trying to share it in the simplest way that I can, so that you can be equipped and you can be prepared and you can make informed, conscientious decisions. And so that being said, I'm going to stop talking and open the floor up for discussion. So I'm going to put my link out here. And if you are interested in joining in on the conversation, you can feel free to do so. I'm putting it here, and I want to put it here. Let me see. Let's do something here. Let's do this. I'm going to make this public. Hang on.
He doesn't like you, but
No?
or he not really.
Let's see. Let's tag a few people. Just tagging a few people. Let's see if I'm just tagging a few people. Let's see if anybody is interested in talking about China and Iran. And it's funny, right now, this could be anybody's show. You can join in. Click the link and you'll go right to the green room and I'll buzz you in. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me. But I don't think I am. I don't think that I am. Wow. That was something exotic. I'm close to the freeway, so I can hear cars going by. And because I'm a gearhead, I can hear things, and I hear like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and I can almost tell what they are by how they sound. And out here in Highway 360 in the DFW, I think some people bring some hardware out there because you can go pretty fast out there. But I think that an historical perspective is important here, and I think that people miss that. Yeah, listen, this conflict, if it's quick, if it's like a real blitzkrieg kind of thing, China may think twice about taking on any aggression in Taiwan. But if it lasts a while, China will be watching and they'll be looking for an opportunity, and we will literally be greasing the skids for the Chinese to move in on Taiwan. And not only will this be bad from a diplomatic standpoint, but it will also be something special in a very negative way from a historical perspective. But that's what I think. What do you think? What do you think? I'd really like to know. I'd really like to catch your thoughts on this. So it's Friday. What are you drinking? I'm drinking Merlot, just a little wine for my stomach's sake, as the Bible says. Also, if you think about this, like a lot of the electronics used in the automobile industry are made in China. In addition to India, a lot of our IT is sourced in China as well. I mean, basically, we're talking about the entire world supply chain being upended by this. And it's funny how um, people just don't see it. They don't see it, and that's um, something that it's a challenge for me because uh, well, and I think about this because like how many people right now are okay with the commitment of our troops to Iran? How many of you are committed to seeing boots on the ground in Iran, to see Marines and soldiers hitting the beaches? How many of you are committed to seeing our warships providing gunfire support? Overextension uh, kills empires faster than direct defeat. And right now, if we are involved in Iran in a protracted conflict and something caps off in China, now we're on two fronts. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for that? I mean, we're talking about stacked crises here. We're talking about energy shock from the Middle East, supply chain shock from Taiwan and China, and financial shock from global instability. All of these things are potential outcomes. These are risks that we have to weigh out. And if you're not okay with any of this, if you're not okay with the energy shock, if you're not okay with the supply chain disruption, if you're not okay with the financial shock, and y'all listen, it's been said that the largest gold mine known to man has recently been discovered in China. What happens when they control the gold? Are we really willing to sacrifice our relationship with China on the altar of an Iran that has done nothing to us? Are you prepared for that? That's the question. Are you willing to accept that as a possibility? Are you willing to deal with that? Do we as a nation have the appetite for that? And I humbly submit to you that we do not. We don't. So I've kept this on for a little while. We're coming up on an hour doing this, and I didn't want to go any longer beyond that. But if you watch this to the end, I really earnestly solicit your thoughts on this. I really would like to know what you think. I really would like to know, because I want to know where we're going as a country. And I really think that even though a lot of people voted for the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I don't think this is what they had in mind. And if that's the case, if you have a little buyer's remorse or voter's remorse, if you will, let me hear it. Let me hear what you have to say. Or if you think that this is a good thing that the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is doing, if you think that this is actually a good thing, that somehow this benefits the United States at some level, let me hear from you. I'd like to know. I really want to know what your thought process is. And finally, if you think this is bullshit, we need to get the fuck out of here as quickly as we can, I want to hear from you too. So that's all I have for you. I hope that you had a fantastic Friday. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully Aaron will be back next week and we'll talk about something less heavy. Something with great taste and less filling. But I thank you for taking the time to listen to what I had to say, and I hope that you will give it consideration and share this video, share with your friends, because you need to know. All right. So until next time, peace. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.